Do you know who Dave Filoni reminds me of? Sean Hannity. Literally will do whatever the person that's in charge of the company or the party wants. He'll just say and do whatever. He has no, so when George was there, he was George's guy. Kathleen Kennedy, he'll do whatever Kathleen Kennedy wants. He'll do whatever the boss wants. He has no opinion of his own, no belief of his own, no foundation of his own. He's a chameleon to whatever the person in charge of him wants.
No, I think Dave Filoni's doing what he wants. So, that's what.
No, fuck that.
And
fuck
I think that's a weird thing to say.
He will 100% cut to whatever the person in charge wants.
I think that Dave Filoni is doing what he wants, just like what he did with Ahsoka, what he wanted to, not what George wanted her to. Not because Kathleen told him to do that. It's what he wanted to do. It's always what he wants to do.
That's not true. He didn't even create Ahsoka. George did.
Well, I'm telling you, yes, but George wanted her to die, right?
Right.
And Dave never wanted that to happen. Dave never ever wanted that to happen. And
I don't think that. I think that
Kathleen Kennedy came in and gave these orders to him to make her a big part of Rebels, or whatever. No, that's Dave Filoni, bro.
But you're telling me if George Lucas really wanted her to die, then she wouldn't have died. Truly, you're telling me if he felt that strongly, he wouldn't have let Dave override him. We're talking about George Lucas here.
Yes, I'm not saying that Dave Filoni could have done it with George there, but I'm saying that's what he wanted to do. So the idea that all of Dave Filoni's decisions are just because Kathleen Kennedy wants some of these things, that is obfuscating all the blame from Dave Filoni that he fucking
I think you're giving him too much credit.
Every decision that Dave Filoni has made in Ahsoka and things like that, it's him, man. And if that's not crystal clear, then I don't know what to tell you. That's just another way of passing the buck and pretending like Dave Filoni has no ownership or responsibility in the current state of Star Wars.
I don't think he does. I think that he's just a cuck. I just think he'll do whatever he's told.
Okay, let's move on.
And I do dismiss the argument. I dismiss the argument. It's well known in the prequels that George Lucas, no one would tell George anything other than yes sir, no sir. George did whatever he wants. So the argument that Dave Filoni shouted down George Lucas over the Ahsoka thing is nonsense.
Well,
if George wanted something done, George would have done it.
I'm not saying that Dave Filoni changed something in what we saw to
but this, you have stood on this argument that George wanted Ahsoka dead. If George wanted her dead, she'd be dead. Bottom line.
They didn't get that far in the storytelling.
Nobody told George what to do. Nobody.
They didn't get that far in the storytelling before they sold to Disney. So
but the point being is
I don't know what you're talking about.
But the point being is if he wanted her dead, she'd be dead. That's the bottom line. If George Lucas wanted her dead, she would be dead.
They didn't get to this part of the story before this happened. I don't understand what that even means.
You talk about me switching blame from Filoni. You've switched blame by acting like George Lucas is not responsible for the Clone Wars, because he is.
Oh, George Lucas is. And
then why do you shift it to Dave? Then why are you shifting it to Dave?
Ever made has been regarding the Clone Wars, whether that's the creation of Ahsoka in general, bringing Darth Maul back to life. And I've said that multiple times, even recently in a video talking about Star Wars.
So then why do you always say Dave Filoni is responsible for the Clone Wars and not George Lucas? Because it was George Lucas's vision. It was George Lucas in charge of all of that, not Dave fucking Filoni. It was George.
Dave Filoni was very impactful in what they did, especially in the later seasons of Clone Wars. And not to say that George was absent. George was not absent. He was reviewing every fucking thing. They walk it by him and he'd say, hey, maybe change that, maybe that, change that, and go.
So then why do you shift it to Dave, but you don't want to shift it to Kathleen?
You think I'm taking everything away from Kathleen Kennedy as if I think that Kathleen Kennedy's some great leader, just Dave Filoni? No, the idea that people keep coming back to this shit, that, Dave Filoni doesn't want to force this shit in there. Dave Filoni's not trying to do this.
I said he's a cuck and he'll do whatever.
He's not a woke piece of shit. It's just because he wants to please Kathleen Kennedy is bullshit. It's letting Dave Filoni off the hook. It's letting this smug piece of garbage who stood up there at that feminist fucking conference and shit all over Star Wars fans, shit all over people like you, people like me, people in this chat. You think that's just because of Kathleen Kennedy made him say that, and that is letting him off the hook.
So he gets all the blame for the Clone Wars, and George doesn't. But he also gets all the credit for Disney Star Wars and Kathleen Kennedy.
History. So stop trying to revert it back
fits your narrative.
It fits your narrative. We're not having a black and white argument.
It fits your narrative. You keep saying that Dave Filoni's Clone Wars. You never say George Lucas's Clone Wars. You say Dave Filoni's Clone Wars. Because it's a narrative you're building.
Clone Wars when I'm talking about Dave Filoni.
Right, but it's never George Lucas's Clone Wars. He had nothing to do with it, apparently, when it's the time to shit on it.
A ton of blame and criticism on George Lucas for his decision.
If you know anything about George Lucas, he had ultimate control of everything that happened in Star Wars.
Do I have to say this before you fucking realize it?
I think that you have a very skewed vision of Dave, and when it fits your narrative, you blame him, and when it doesn't, you blame someone else. That's it.
I think that my vision of Dave Filoni has proved to be prophesized, right? Because my vision of Dave Filoni, which I maintain, even when it's extremely unpopular, like it was maybe when I started my channel and started talking about these things, I feel like that is the correct vision of what I feel like Dave Filoni is and always has been. When I've been looking at the storytelling, when I've been looking at his
then why didn't George just hand him? Then why didn't George just hand him Lucasfilm? Why didn't George just hand Lucasfilm to Dave? If he was so integral in George's mind and changed his opinions and had all this creative input in these projects, why didn't George just hand Dave fucking creative control then? Why didn't he turn it over to him instead of Kathleen Kennedy?
I don't think that the idea that people have of Dave as George's Padawan or that he viewed him as his right-hand man, I don't think that's reality. You know, I think they were friends, and I think, of course, they developed a good relationship, but I don't think that anything like that was ever the case.
So then who is the most responsible for Clone Wars, George Lucas or Dave Filoni?
I think in terms of the creation of
the answer,
series,
you just don't want to say
Lucas. I'm telling you. I'm talking about in terms of the creation of the series, George Lucas. Now, when you're talking about every single little bit, every single line of dialogue, all of these things that are happening, right?
Who signed off on all of it?
Not the overarching, like,
who signed off on all of it?
Lot of Clone Wars, but I'm talking about all of the intricate little details along the way. I think you're looking at a lot of the people that wrote it. Dave Filoni supervising a lot of those people that wrote it, including himself at times. But like, there's no doubt that in my mind, George Lucas is much to blame for the decisions in Clone Wars. This is pre-Disney. Bringing Darth Maul back, I think, is one of the biggest mistakes in the history of Star Wars.
So you think it's feminist garbage, Clone Wars? So you think George Lucas pushed feminist garbage within Star Wars?
I think that there are some feminist elements of Clone Wars that I think were kind of warning signs of what could happen moving forward. And I think Rebels fleshes that out a little bit more. And now you see the state of all of these different characters that, you know, Dave Filoni either had a part in creating or he himself created and continued their stories and things like Rebels. And now you see how they're being utilized in all these live action series.
I think Rebels,
you look back and you can see those warning signs.
I think Rebels is a classic Dave Filoni project without George Lucas and without Kathleen Kennedy, and it's very lifeless and boring with a ton of filler. I think that Clone Wars is George Lucas with Dave Filoni being involved, and I think now you're seeing Dave Filoni involved with Kathleen Kennedy's version of Star Wars and its feminist propaganda. I think the Clone War or Rebels is a perfect view of what Dave Filoni Star Wars is without any oversight, and it's boring.
I think what it is. I think that Ahsoka is the perfect representation of what Dave Filoni
he had Favreau. He had Favreau involved in that, didn't he?
I think Favreau would probably produce, but that was a Dave Filoni fucking thing.
Favreau and Filoni are pretty tight. They're pretty tight, and they work hand in hand, and I think that's been proven.
100%.
Yeah,
but like, you can't tell me based on the things we've seen in something like Rebels that Ahsoka isn't basically Dave Filoni's wet dream of everything he's wanted to do. And I don't think you've even watched Ahsoka, have you?
No.
Okay, so That's what I mean.
Yeah.
So how are you putting this out there? That's your fucking opinion
Because
about this thing. You haven't even watched it.
Because I don't think it's worth watching. I have no interest in watching what they're doing because I hate what they're doing.
Okay. All right.
I hate the vision of what they're doing.
But
I still think that it's Kathleen Kennedy Star Wars, not Dave Filoni Star Wars.
Got it. Let's move on. Ratchild UK, does Ryan know that Maul was brought back in an Obi-Wan novel long before TCW?
Ryan knows everything about Star Wars.
I know more about Star Wars than you will ever know in your life, Ratchild UK. Maul was not brought back in an Obi-Wan novel. Maul, there was a Star Wars Infinities comic, an Infinities Tale, which was basically Star Wars version of Marvel What If, where they were like, what if this retarded thing happened? What if this retarded thing happened? And there was a what if story where Darth Maul survived. That's what you're talking about. He was not canonically brought back, just so you know. But I'm more than willing to educate you on Star Wars whenever I have the opportunity.